Hello. This is just a short video to give a preview taste of what my workshops look like. I've got a couple coming up and thought it would be helpful to give you an idea of just what you might be in for and what it might be supportive for if you're finding yourself curious or perhaps interested. Before I dive in, I'll just invite you to allow your body to breathe in the way that feels most naturally pleasant. Remembering that nothing about you needs to be any different, and that everything I offer is an invitation. So if it doesn't feel good, don't do it. Honor what your system is telling you and finding your own organic pathway to growth. So the workshops that I offer really focus on embodied nourishment and co-regulation. And what do I mean by that? As you might have seen in my previous videos, if you've watched them, the meditations and the short talks, embodied nourishment is really just attuning to your body's ability to feel good and to practice cultivating a down-to-earth sense of feeling good. And really what I do here is focus on non-addictive pleasure. And by that, I mean, we're not trying to force anything to happen. We're not really trying to make anything happen, but instead, by just attending to what pleasantness is already here and welcoming that, inviting that, attuning to that, we actually find that there's lots of resource, lots of goodness that is already existing that we can tap into and cultivate and attend to in a way that helps us to feel good in a way that's really sustainable compared to the normal types of pleasure practices in our culture that we have, which aren't bad, but they're often like consumptive or in themselves draining in some sort of way. I'll have longer talks on that sort of thing that dive in more deeply content-wise. But when it comes to the workshops, you can expect to have some practice both on an individual level and on a relational level of cultivating good feeling. And so that's both like individual sort of meditative practices and embodied practices, and then taking that into the context of connection with others. That's where the co-regulation piece comes in. And co-regulation is the simple practice of attuning to self and other, attuning to the relational field between you and another person, and using that because with the right orientation and the right sorts of practices, you can practice feeling really good and cultivating good feelings with another person by simply honoring what it's like to be in connection with another person. Again, not making anything different, but by being genuine with what's happening right here and honoring what's happening in the other person and the reverberations and the dance moves, the natural sorts of dance that happens relationally. You can get to feeling really good and nourished without having to do all that much. And I use embodied communication practices. I draw from authentic relating practices and social meditation and really emphasize embodied aspects of that. Because normally in our conversational practices, we're very cognitively focused. We're talking from thought. We're talking about what happened over the past week or what we're looking forward to in the future, or sharing memories and stories and things like that. And none of that is bad. But here, what I support is really breaking down to the most fundamental level of where nourishment is and how, if both people are oriented to nourishment and are practicing with clear emotional boundaries and speaking from a place of genuineness, you can get to nourishment really quickly and really safely, um, without all that much effort. And so, in the types of practices that I offer, as opposed to going into, oh, how are you? Oh, tell me more about that, blah, blah, blah. You might start with, oh, being in connection with you, I feel a sense of openness, but a little bit of caution. And the other person might say, hearing that, oh, I feel open as well, but a little bit cautious too. And then when you hear each other and go back and forth in that embodied sense, you naturally attune to where the connection is and what's possible and what feels good for both people, because both people are honoring and speaking from just what's happening here and now. There's more to that, and I can explain more about that in future videos, and I hope to share some that include actual practice with me and another person. But just for now, what this type of practice is really good for is intimacy and relational sorts of resourcing. You know, we can have really good relationships, but how often do we actually just sink into restfulness or playfulness or just that embodied pleasure state, and get into the subtle layers of that, without needing to grasp or go anywhere. Just actually getting filled up by the nourishment that's available and right here. Because again, a lot of our pleasure practices and a lot of our relational practices, they're about parallel consumption. We go to the movies or watch TV together or go to concerts. Or, when we think about pleasure and sensuality, it's all about, it's a lot about sex. And again, sex isn't bad, but there's so much sustainable and nourishing and interesting pleasure and sensuality that's available in much lower risk ways of connecting. And that can be utilized in romantic relationships or friendships or collaborative relationships if you work together or on projects together. And it's also really useful for conflict, because instead of going into story and blame and lobbing things that really hurt each other and pulling on each other in certain sorts of ways, you just practice owning what's really happening. And one person can be like, oh, I feel this anger arising, and I notice that my brain is trying to find the thing to blame. And the other person can be like, oh, hearing that, I've noticed that, like, I want to shrink away from your anger. And the other person hearing that, there's a natural co-regulatory process that happens where when you actually witness what's happening inside the other person, as opposed to receiving the pushback, like through like an attack, then you can hear, oh, that person wants to shrink away from me. Hearing that, I notice that my system wants to cool down and that I'm taking a little bit more space. Obviously, it can be more complex than that. We play through a lot of our patterns this way, but when we make them explicit, we start to be able to have more choice in where we move and where we go, because our cultural scripts around emotional content, whether it's the good, nourishing stuff that I was talking about earlier or the conflict stuff that I'm talking about now, really suck. They really suck. Yeah. You only have to look at so many of the really intractable relational dynamics that are happening all the time with so many people. What my workshops and my work really do and aim to do are provide just some down to earth and easy relational tools, both for how you relate to yourself and how you relate to others, that are generalizable and with a little bit of practice can make your communication game and your emotional intelligence game really, really ramp up in a way that, well, I hope you find nourishing. So if you have questions or curiosities, please send them to me. You can send them via DM, or you can comment on wherever you're watching this video. I've got a couple in-person workshops coming up. One Saturday, April 8th, I believe, and the second is like the first Saturday in May. They're both on my Facebook page, or my Eventbrite page, that you can find through my link tree. And I'm going to be scheduling some virtual workshops as well, and I'll be putting out some events for that, and maybe even a poll to get an idea when it would work for people, because I know my following is a little small currently, so I want to find when it really works for the people that are already interested. So be on the lookout for those things. On that note, I hope you all are having a happy day and enjoying whatever nourishment is available. Have a good one.